one is a perfect one for you. So you guys have a course on growing, but I'm curious about the after process, drying, drying, testing, and maybe also sales.
Excellent. Yeah, this is one of my favorite areas of the research literature, and something I focused on was post-harvest drying. So it's very interesting. Let me start real quick with just some of the traditional knowledge based off of so many studies I've pulled together over the past 7 years, which is a lot of the traditional drying methods will point to trends that can, kind of be then further examined in specific studies, and that's exactly what's been done. And it's led to, I would say, a pretty strong consensus on what's most optimal. So, for starters, usually people like to say that the best quality saffron comes from Spain. Part of the reason is La Mancha region is super famous for their saffron, but when researchers have dove into why that is the case, what we have found, and when I say we, I mean the royal we of to the research community, has found that the way they actually toast their saffron is the term they use. It will be over a hot coal bed, and they use a silk sleeve basically to hold the saffron. So that's a little bit more temperature regulated, so the stigma filaments don't burn or become over dried. And this is tend to lead to what we call high temperature, low time dehydration method that is very useful for stimulating the production of safranol in saffron. Safranol is one of the main aroma compounds that gives that just characteristic saffron smell. And of course, that plays into favor as well, since there is a strong correlation between olfaction, our smell, and of course, flavor, taste. So safranol is produced from picocrosin. Picocrosin is one of the main flavor compounds in saffron. And another pathway for the production of safranol is a compound called HTCC, which is basically a storage molecule, a storage reservoir is what you could think of it as for safranol. Both of these things under high temperature basically get transferred into safranol. So you need high temperature to help stimulate that process. Now, don't get me wrong. You will see, therefore, a correlation between higher safranol levels and lower picocrosin levels, and that, in most cases, can be desirable. Now, a lower temperature dehydration method that lasts for a longer time is usually seen in countries like Iran, Morocco, your more, let's say traditional producing regions that tend to have larger bulk. And part of the reason why, for starters, they can do it is because they live in a semi-arid, arid climate, very low humidity. That would not work in a place like where I'm at today at Saffron Systems in Maryland, where it's super humid, and you would just have so much fungal mold, and it would not work well. So low temperature dehydration methods for longer times, in some cases, has been shown to increase crocin, because crocin is a temperature volatile compound, in that if temperature is reached too high, crocin will break down. And so don't get me wrong, however, because there are some studies that can test this, whereby higher temperatures for lower times is perhaps that, again, perfect threshold for both increasing crocin and safranol. So the jury is still out on whether crocin, I would argue, is more optimized in lower temperature or higher temperature dehydration methods. But no doubt, for a higher quality smelling saffron, you're going to want a higher temperature dehydration method. Post-harvest, after drying, is also crucial. So finding a means of storage for your containers for saffron is both a business decision, as Victor can certainly attest to, in terms of how you present your product, all the way to a let's say research scientific decision in how you preserve the best quality saffron for the longest period of time. And the only thing I'll add to that, and then Victor, if you want to add into just how do you determine what packaging to go with, is that there is really nice literature showing that safranol will actually increase over time in well preserved. When I say preserved, in a properly stored saffron sample. That when I say properly stored, I mean low UV, light exposure to the saffron, not fluctuating temperatures. Generally, a little bit cooler is better. Things like that will tend to lead to a higher production of safranol over time in already dried and stored saffron. And again, part of that reason, if we go back to these two molecules, picochrose and HTCC, is that HTCC will actually break down enzymatically over time in dried saffron that releases more safranol. But do you want to put a plug in how do you choose packaging, Victor?
For packaging, it all depends again on the industry where we are selling. For B2C, has to be catchy, but it's smaller sizing. Basically, you sell 1 grams to 3 gram packages in a way to people. So then again, I will just add on as well. I want to highlight that drying and storing, even after you did everything correctly in the growing process and you harvested correctly, you didn't waste any saffron. You can ruin everything by drying and then also storing. So I agree. I want to highlight as well what Khalid mentioned, that it's a business decision for you to store your saffron well, because then if you don't store it well, you can ruin the quality, and quality is your business in a way, especially in the beginning. So you don't want to ruin this. And then there was a underlying second question for maybe testing as well. If you could maybe touch upon this, and then I can again add something.
Yeah, testing has always been a very tough topic in that depending on where you are, you either have more or less resources available to you. So testing is carried out through ISO 3632 methods and standards. There is a draft standard by the Codex Committee, which is yet to be released. And usually Codex is a UN-hosted, United Nations hosted entity that basically will help offer, let's say, cheaper versions of standards. They're still just as rigorous, in my opinion. I met with both the committee from ISO 3632 and the committee from Codex maybe 8 months ago, and went over just, in my opinion, some strengths and weaknesses, and just wanted to see what was on the horizons for both organizations. And so, yeah, the draft standard for saffron from Codex will look fairly similar to ISO 3632. And they're debating changing one or two minor things. But generally speaking, the grading and classification of saffron from these two standards works mostly on crocin and picocrocin. Unfortunately, saffronol just has to be at or above a certain concentration, so that doesn't have differing levels. So they're going to be mostly focusing on your coloring and flavor properties in terms of how your saffron grades. And to get that tested, of course, you have to go to a laboratory that offers these tests. If you're fortunate enough and you can access, let's say, your local agricultural research institution from a university, then they might be able to offer you a much better rate. I don't think they're going to be a commercially viable option, let's say, for doing testing, let's say, every year, or every however many times you want to do it. That said, other institutions like Eurofins, which I know Victor has some experience with, they're much larger, chemical laboratory setup. They tend to run a little bit more pricey. However, they are robust and they certainly can follow ISO 3632 standards. My company has certainly been working on, helping growers to find and access testing. And again, like I said earlier, it's one of those things where, especially in the United States, is a little bit more scarce than what would be most ideal. But Victor, do you want to add anything onto that?
I can just add that, as you said, the ISO 3632, that's like the golden standard in a way. That's like your basic starting point. Then depending on the industry, you will have to need other tests, microbiological tests, tests for pesticides or herbicides, or other tests depending on the needs of the customer. But this all depends on the industry where you are selling. So then I would just basically, based on where you are selling, I would just focus on getting those necessary tests or certifications for the product to be able to sell for your necessary category, so you don't have to go overboard with testing, because it, as you mentioned, costs money. Also takes some saffron, even though it's not that much, but it takes some saffron away, and it costs money as well. So you have to take all this in mind as well. But because with the grading, you always try to go for the highest grade, so grade A, because that's where most of the money in the market is as well. So basically, it's super negin and grade A. That is the category which everybody tries to be in, because that's where most of the money in the saffron field is, and that is the most used part of the flower as well, or the most demanded one as well.
Excellent, excellent. And